What I give is generosity of acceptance. And that's a whole nother gift that isn't something that people see so often, but is very much like valuable and huge when it comes to giving. Like how many people do you know that you can sit with, that you can be completely yourself and just be accepted that way with no expectations or judging or anything else? And that's what I bring to the table. So when I recognized that, I was like, oh damn, like that's how I give. You know, it doesn't look like A, B, and C. And because I have these boundaries be around my time and energy, I'm able to give even more of that and also be a light at the same time. Whereas when I'm compromised that piece of myself, that's when I get exhausted and burn out and can't show up as well. So what makes you show up better and make sure that you fill your cup and set your boundaries?
Yeah.
The outtakes.
Right. Yeah. And then I think it's also, so as you grow, you kind of realize that some people don't feed your soul, and that's okay.
That's okay. Yeah.
It doesn't make them a bad person. It just makes them not like a good fit.
And that's another piece of the scarcity mindset, because when we're afraid to let things go, that means like when we say yes to something, we say no to something else. So what are you saying yes to? Like staying in that same energy or the same relationship or the same cycle. Whereas if you let that thing go, what do you actually make room for? And that includes with people.
Yeah.
So, and people don't have to be all things for us. Like every single person we meet doesn't have to check off all the boxes for us. This person can be really good at like, okay, when I need to vent, this is who I go to. When I want to hang out with the girls, this is who's in my circle. When I want to talk through relationship issues, this is the person I can go to. When, like, knowing what you need, I need compassion. I need somebody to listen. I need somebody to hold space. I need somebody to really check me. Like, who are those people? And recognizing that and being able to tap into that instead of everybody having to fit like all those boxes, because that's ridiculous.
And trying to please everyone, because it's okay if you're like, I don't have the capacity to do this right now. Which not everyone's going to be okay with those boundaries because they aren't used to those boundaries, because you teach people how to treat you. So if you're constantly teaching them that like, you will always be there when you're like, I can't, it's okay to speak up for yourself and be like, I can't do this right now. Or yeah, like literally just being open with them. But then there's also that not everyone has to be everything when it comes to your friends. Like, you don't, like you were saying, you don't have to be all in. There's, that
doesn't mean you appreciate, I mean, you can, but it doesn't mean that you appreciate or love or care for one person more than the other. It's just, this is who you are with that person and vice versa. And this is the space that this person holds for you and vice versa. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I wish I remembered what book it was, but it's like 3 different baskets that you have of friendships. So one is like, they are your closest people. They're your absolute best friends. They're very, very healthy relationships. And then you have the next relationship, which is kind of what you're saying, where it's like, we want to go out and have a couple drinks, like we hang out, we enjoy each other's time. But they're also not the ones that I'm going to ask the big life questions to help me navigate through my life. And then there's basket 3, which is the acquaintances, where it's like, yeah, we're friends, we can go have lunch. But I'm also probably not going to tell you like the big things happening in my life. And that is okay to keep them kind of at a distance and give them the energy when you have the extra. But the ones that you're really putting your time and energy into is that basket 1 friends.
And it's funny because even though like we were talking about Brene Brown a little bit ago, I love how she talks about like trust. And that's part of what it is, like learning who you can trust with which pieces of yourself. And she talks about it about marbles in a jar. So with people, like you have to test it out, right? So I'm going to trust you with this piece of myself, and however they consistently show you who you are, that's what you know, I can trust you with this piece of me, or I can't trust you with that piece of me. And it's not the monumental huge things that happen in our lives that make and break trust. It's actually the little everyday things, like people remembering your name or your preferences, or calling to check on you and make sure you're okay. Like it's the little things that add up that fill your jar with all those marbles, where you're like, you're my person. You've got
Yeah.
me. Or your marbles are labeled and you're like, okay, I trust you with this piece of me and I trust you with this piece of me, but this piece I know that I'm not going to share with you because I can't trust you with that piece.
Yeah.
So.
Oh gosh, what was I just about to say? I don't even remember.
With
It had to do with that though.
the marbles in a jar
Yes.
and trusting people with different pieces of you.
Yeah. No, it's not going to come back to me.
Okay.
It's okay.
Yeah, there's so many different pieces of it. And like the willpower too, again, like just going back to that disconnection. And we can, especially as women, like so often go back and forth because we should do this and we should do that. But at the same time, like a lot of times, and even when it comes to making business decisions, it's finding that common ground. So if your heart and your intuition are telling you this thing and your mind is telling you this thing, what's the common thread that you can focus on that connects the two of them that can help you recognize and take action?
Yeah.
Instead of going back and forth like, I should really, no, like what's the common thread? Focus on that and do things that line up with that.
Right. Because like you and I were talking before like hitting record again, because this conversation is good, is how your logic will almost never steer you wrong, but that your emotions can. So then you kind of get stuck in these cycles. And I know that if you look back through your life, you can see so many cycles, especially if you start going through therapy. Like I'm a huge believer in therapy, that everybody needs therapy. And I love that that's becoming more common and open now. But you can see these same cycles where emotion stops you from being your truest self. But if you sit and you listen to your logic, if you follow that, like it can lead to this beautiful life. But that also means becoming uncomfortable, going through that wilderness to get to the other side, which is freedom and like living your absolute best life.
It's so funny you say that because like I wrote this blog a few weeks ago, but it's being released June 1st, and it's about me being a former mean girl, which I don't know if I've ever shared with you, but like I was the mean girl. I was the cute girl with a big smile that could just tear you up one side and down the other and took pride in it, and like had all my armor, all my walls up all the time. I was an island. And it wasn't until I really started evaluating like my romantic relationships and the patterns there that I started recognizing like I didn't want to be the person that everybody came to for all the things that never got my cup filled, and learning how to be vulnerable and let people in, and how scary it was until it wasn't. Like it was another thing that you just had to practice. And that's how I've curated like such amazing support and amazing friendships, is because I know what it used to look like to be like that. And I chose differently because I wanted something different. And then again, taking the actions aligned with, oh yeah, I was the mean girl. I made people quit jobs in a night before. Like if I was the judgmental, like cut through you with the eyes. But again, like I used to tell all the girls I trained, you can say anything to anybody with the biggest smile. Yeah. And was totally just like, say whatever you want. Like say the thing, but that was constantly pushing people away, and I didn't want to be that person anymore. And I like still have girls that I'm like, damn, I did a number on her. I know I did. So yeah.
How did that kind of start, like changing to be like, I am no longer going to be this person, to becoming the person that you are now today?
Becoming a mom. Seriously, like I had my son and he was young, and I started to really look at like my life and all of the stories and experiences that were in place and the cycles that I had, and going, do I want to pass these things on to him? And deciding no, like absolutely not, especially when it came to relationships and family dynamics. But then figuring out how that looked different and just doing the things that looked differently. And it was between the time that he was born and the time that I was about to turn 30 that I really started analyzing all that. And then probably a good 8, 9, 10 years of like hard work, reframing, relearning, like all of the things and implementing everything I learned. So yeah.
You're definitely right. Becoming a mom changes.
It's a huge motivator.
Because personally, so I originally thought that we were having a boy, and which I was like, I'll be a great mom. It'll be great. Because then it was like on her dad at the time. I was like, oh, it'll be on him to teach her how to, or teach him how to be like a man.
Okay.
And then I found out that I was having a girl. And then immediately I was like, oh crap. Like she's going to look to me what it means to be a woman in this world. And it's kind of like for the past 5 years, it's been like this self-discovery where she's my little buddy. And
she watches everything mom does.
Oh yeah. And I know exactly the type of woman that I hope that she grows up to be, which is like strong, confident, self-assured, which kind of goes with that whole confident piece. But I know that I have to model that. I can't just tell her.
No, I mean, you can tell people things all day, every day, but the actions that you take are way more important and have way more influence than the words that you say.
Yeah.
Like if you're constantly undermining your verbal message, good luck.
Like I know you and I have talked before when it comes to your son that it is incredible the type of example that you as his mom have shown him, which is to be all these things, which is like strong, confident, to find your voice, and it's okay to say how you feel. And this like accepting place that you've created for him, that he can be vulnerable with you.
Absolutely. Like so vulnerable. And that's like one of the most beautiful things that we have shifted in our family, because I came from a family where we didn't talk about anything. You could feel your emotions, but anger was probably the only one that dad was allowed to show, and everybody else was just like over on the edge, like waiting to see how it was going to happen. But we didn't talk through anything. And like, especially as women, like we make so many assumptions about things. That was another thing that really helped me shift from being a mean girl to actually like getting away from being an island and helping people come in, was again realizing that most of what I thought other people thought about me was complete and utter BS, but then asking, like, why is it up to me? Why is it my responsibility to figure it out when I can literally just ask you and get the real deal and then use that information? And that also helps create trust, because it's vulnerability, but it creates that space to be true and authentic with each other. So it was really stepping into like, oh, most of the stories I tell myself are crap. So what's the real story? Well, how do you find out the real story? You ask, and then taking that information and trusting it. It's not your responsibility to prove it or fulfill it or anything else, but taking that information and letting them be responsible for their actions behind that. But then you also have the power to recognize it and plug into it, or walk away from it if it's not for you. So
with you saying that, I am a recovering empath people pleaser. And one thing that my therapist has told me, and it was like my aha moment, is she's like, so when you're talking to someone and you feel like you're taking on that emotion for them, are you really taking that emotion from them so that they don't have to carry it, or do they still have that emotion? And it's like, oh crap,
and that's
still have it.
In our, like, especially in like this is huge in religious spaces, which obviously like West Michigan is a huge religious space. But it's the saviorism. It's the wanting to fix it. And that's part of what like robs us of our ability to not only process, but build resiliency, is trying to fix things. And that's why being uncomfortable is so important, like learning to be uncomfortable. And that doesn't mean like not recognizing like bad situations, toxic situations and things like that. But that means like, it's okay for somebody to feel a certain way, and you don't have to own that feeling for them or with them, letting them sit with their feelings, letting that be okay, and letting them move through it so they can get to the other side of that tunnel. But saviorism is so huge here, and that's what creates a victim. And the victim is the one that is defined by those things, opposed to being empowered. God, what's the other word for it? Because there's two things. There's a drama triangle, which talks about like the saviorism, the victim, and can't remember what the third one is, but then there's the power dynamic, which shifts all those things, where the savior actually becomes the coach. And then there's like the challenger, but that's a good thing, because it's like, no, you can do better. Your standards are higher. I know you can do it, and pulls you up here. And then the victim actually becomes the creator, where they're the one that creates their reality, because they're not disempowered anymore.
Yeah. And then I think it's also okay when someone's coming to you with something like that, where you automatically want to like take on that emotion, even though we know now like you can't, but you can still be there to let them have that space. But it's also okay within that communication to ask them, are we trying to problem solve here, or do you need to be heard?
What do you need right now?
Yeah. But it's also okay to tell people where I'm like, where I could come to you with a problem and be like, I don't want a solution right now. I just need to feel heard. Like, it's okay to start practicing those things and saying what you need to someone.
And that takes a personal awareness to be able to do that. But you were talking about being an empath. I'm a huge empath too. And I'm also an HSP, so a highly sensitive person. So I'm very in tune emotionally and energetically to other people. And it's funny because even as an empath, what's really helped me not own those emotions and feelings for other people is just boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's like the biggest thing. So I'm still an empath. I can still feel what you feel, even physically. It doesn't even have to be emotionally. Physically, when somebody talks through like having a surgery or having their knee torn apart or whatever that looks, I can still like, I get feelings of that. But it's just boundaries, saying like, this is where I end and you start, and this is the line that's there, and knowing where that stands with other people and experiences.
And I know one thing, especially when it comes to like families, I think, because your
really
family
hard.
has known you the longest, and they may still have this like image of you, because that kind of whole, you know, you teach people how you are allowed to be treated, or how you want to be treated. So what are those one things that like, there's like
the Newton's cradle,
where like it goes back and forth.
I talk about this all the time.
So when you start putting those boundaries in place, it's going to keep swinging back and forth, where you're going to put the boundary,
pushback,
and then you're going to get that pushback where it's like, no, this is not the dance.
And they will too.
Like, this isn't the dance that we're used to. So like keep pushing back, and eventually like
it slows down and centers.
Yeah,
and that again takes practice.
So it
doesn't mean. Because I think that's where we can forget so often. And with families, I think there's that extra, like an obligation. We feel obligated, right, to accommodate them or to be who we were, to make them comfortable, because somehow we're supposed to, instead of letting everybody find their own rhythm.
I was the pleaser in the family.
Yeah. And so, and I was the oldest child. So I was the keeper of all the things and the fixer. And that's like the other thing that's really helpful, is knowing those things about yourself. And then again, deciding like, is this who I want to be? How do I shift it and all those things? But it takes like, it's setting a boundary, and then it swings back, and we forget that it's not going to go from, okay, this is what my new boundary is, to, oh, it's so well received, we're doing great. No, it's a process. And again, it's that back and forth, and the practice, the testing of the boundaries to make sure like, oh, do you really mean it? Oh, what are you going to reinforce? What's the story you're telling? And keep going back and forth, and not to give in or compromise that boundary, but stand firm. And either the person will join you and come with you and it'll be good, or you're just going to have to leave them behind. And that's okay sometimes too. It depends. And that's going to be different for everybody. That's not something that you should to somebody else. Like, you should be doing this or that. That's going to be different for everybody.
And it's okay in like, you know, a family, if they do not accept your boundaries, you don't have to completely cut them out of your life. You know what? You can, like, okay, I do have this one friendship that, it's very kind of one-sided, but I don't want this person out of my life. So I've created like those boundaries where it's like, you know what? I can dedicate a couple days a year to keep you in my life, because you still like, there's still that friendship. There's still that history, but it's not going to be a basket one friendship where you are always investing in it, because those boundaries have to be put into place. But especially with family, you know, it's okay to still have them in your life in some capacity, because family's the hardest one, when you're like, you don't have to accept, you know, that negativity or something, but you also may not want to completely alienate them out of your life. So it's okay to have like a boundary, even saying, this is how much I'm willing to give this person. I hope that makes sense.
It does. And like, there's probably going to be seasons to it too. So like the family dynamic, friendship dynamic, whatever that looks like, it's going to be different in this season. And as we grow and evolve, it's going to look different, and they grow and evolve, it's going to look different too. So it's not going to look the same all the time for everybody. A lot of times it's going to ebb and flow and have peaks and valleys and look completely different, and don't judge it, just move through it.
Yeah.
So,
and I'm a very visual person, so like, and my therapist knows this, so she like is always giving me these visuals. So one thing that I always picture is this like going through the wilderness, that it's really like, it's dark and it's not comfortable. You just want it to be light. You want the situation to be over, but you have to go through those things to get to that other side. And then it's like beautiful. And it's not like this one-time thing, like, oh, we're on the other side.
Right.
I never have to go through that again. And then another visual that she has given me is when really big, and that's one thing we're talking about as well, as the trauma piece of life, because we all have trauma at some point in our life, to where it is okay to put whatever the situation is in a box and say, I don't have the capacity to deal with this right now. I'm accepting that this exists. Put it up on the shelf. You can take it down every once in a while. You can peek inside, you know, you can deal with little pieces of it at a time. As long as you eventually are going to take that box down. Right. You're going to unpack it.
So it's not avoidance. It's just self-awareness of, I have the time and energy to do this. And if I don't, what else do you need to focus on?
Yeah, exactly. But completely avoiding it.
That's not healthy.
Because your body is incredible. And it eventually will sneak up on you to the point that it's screaming at you, I need attention in this area, like this trauma, this problem, whatever, it is going to eventually scream at you to where you don't have an option but to deal with it.
So why wait for your hand to be forced?
Yeah,
definitely.
It's like, accept that it is there.
There's another thing too, where it's like, so often, especially as women, we can get so focused on the big picture and trying to figure out how all the pieces connect, that when we constantly tap into that, that's another place where like our willpower, the mind and the heart can really disconnect, because we're trying to do all the things instead of saying, okay, like, where do I need to focus my energy? What's the number one thing? And instead of being responsible for all of these things, just aiming at this one and getting that one done and then moving on to the next, which actually a lot of times can take way less time and energy to do it that way. But we're just not used to doing things that way.
We're used to doing all the things.
Like, but if I do this, it'll do that. What's the priority? What do you need to get done? What's either going to leverage your time and energy, or what's the absolute thing that you have to get done right now, and then aiming towards that.
And I think it's also okay to become okay with not having all the answers, because we so desperately,
who has all the answers? Like, who is that?
Well, that's what makes the past comfortable, or cycles comfortable, is because we know
you
how
already
they end
know.
Up. Whereas the future is scary, and when you change, it's really, really scary, and it's really hard. But being okay with being like, I'm not going to know everything,
girl,
and I have to be okay with this, and I have to sit in that, because your feelings also don't like being ignored. You have to feel the feels. And I have a couple friends that they're like, I don't like crying. It's uncomfortable. And I'm like over here, like, let's sob about everything. Or I have friends that like, when they call me crying, I actually feel a little bit happy, because I'm like,
because they're actually expressing their emotions.
You are okay feeling these feelings. It is okay to cry, as uncomfortable as that is. You are pushing yourself to that barrier that you've put up for yourself to actually just let it go. Just cry, feel those feelings, feel the feels.
I have like this trick, and I don't have to use it anymore. I'm totally fine feeling all the feelings now. But back in the day, like probably 5 to 10 years ago, there was especially like a really traumatic point in my life, and it was just so heavy, but I also was still somewhat guarded and didn't know how to feel those things. And I literally would it was a life hack. I would watch movies that made me cry in order for that release. So like I knew I needed to cry, but I wasn't comfortable crying with A or B or by myself or whoever that was. So I would literally watch the movie for that release, move through it, and then go on to the next thing. until I learned that it was okay.
Growing up, my sister and I would talk to each other because occasionally we would just like feel like something is wrong. We couldn't pinpoint what it was. And her and I were like really good about talking about that in the moments that were like, something feels off. I just don't know what it is. And really it was just, if we just like cried. And so like, if we would just like let ourselves cry, it would be like, if I could cry right now, I'd be fine. It's that like release of emotions because like they get so bottled up inside that that's when they start screaming like, we need attention. We need this to be addressed.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's scary.
Yep. Until it's not.
Yeah. And then we'll go through something else in life that we have to go through the wilderness or put it in a box up on a shelf. Like there's always going to be those moments.
Always
it's never a like, you know, we've made it. We never have to deal with it again.
No, it's always there. Something is always there.
Yeah. I should probably go pick up my girl now.
She'd probably like that. Time for an adventure.
Yep. Until next time.